There are people you remember long after they've left the room, not because they said something profound, not because they were loud or extravagant, but because they carried something, an invisible weight, that made others look, pause, and adjust themselves in their presence. They didn't ask for attention, they pulled it. They didn't fight for respect, it bent toward them. We call this presence, charisma, magnetism, but these are soft words for something far more precise and far more dangerous. This is not mysticism, it's not magic, it's not luck. It is designate reasons. The kind that makes you untouchable is not a gift you're born with. It is a weapon, forged quietly in isolation, sharpened through restraint, and wielded through controlled exposure. And no one understood this better than Machiavelli. The world likes to imagine power as something loud. But real power, the kind that lasts, is quiet. It doesn't demand, it implies, it doesn't chase. It waits in a world addicted to visibility. The untouchable play a different game. They weaponize absence. Before we understand what makes someone untouchable, we have to kill the myth of natural confidence. There's no such thing. Confidence is not something you feel, it's something others feel around you. Because you move slower, you speak less, you listen longer, you hold silence like a sword insecure. People try to fill space, untouchable people create it, and then own it. But the illusion goes deeper, because presence isn't just about how you move. It's about what you withhold in a room full of people trying to be understood. The untouchable person gives away nothing, not their excitement, not their anger, not their intentions, not their fears. This creates a vacuum, one that others rush to fill with their own projections. They start trying to impress, to decode, to lean in. You become an enigma in a world that's far too readable, and we chase what we don't understand. So what you withhold becomes more powerful than what you show. Machiavelli knew this in The Prince. He wrote not just about ruling cities, but about ruling perception. He advised leaders to appear kind while planning ruthlessly, to appear vulnerable while striking without warning, to wear masks that disarm others while always calculating underneath. This wasn't deception for the sake of cruelty. It was strategy for the sake of survival. And today, this applies not just to rulers and revolutionaries, but to anyone navigating a world of manipulation, competition, and noise. Because in the modern world, you are constantly being read, judged, weighed, and the more readable you are, the more controllable you become. Machiavelli's insight was brutal, but clear. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are. To be untouchable is to master that duality, to let the world see your silhouette, but never your spine. To give them just enough to keep guessing, but never enough to predict you, because what people can predict, they can control. What they can't predict, they fear, and fear, Machiavelli argued, is far more reliable than love. So when we talk about presence, what we're really talking about is perception management, not in the shallow, Instagrammable sense, but in the cold, surgical sense of withholding yourself until the moment matters. The untouchable do not walk into a room hoping to be liked. They enter already knowing who they are, and so they don't need confirmation from anyone else, and that alone makes them magnetic, because in a world where everyone is performing, authenticity looks like power. But this authenticity is not raw emotion, it's not vulnerability without boundaries, it's clarity, clarity of purpose, clarity of presence, clarity of silence. When the untouchable speak, it means something, because they didn't waste words on performance. When they act, it creates ripples, because their moves aren't impulsive, they're calculated. And when they withdraw, it creates obsession, because their absence feels louder than others' presence. Isn't about manipulation for its own sake, it's about protecting your energy, your image, and your influence in a world that feeds on openness without mercy. Because the truth is, if you give the world too much access to your soul, it will treat it like free content. To become untouchable is not to become cruel. It's to become selective with your time, your attention, your reactions, your exposure. It's to stop explaining yourself, to stop apologizing for taking up Space to stop leaking power in the form of approval seeking it. S to understand that mystery is not a trick, it's a shield, and behind that shield, your presence becomes undeniable. You don't need to intimidate, you don't need to chase, you don't need to speak over anyone. You just need to walk into a room knowing that presence is not volume, it's velocity. It's not how fast you move. It's how centered you are while everyone else is spinning. That's the secret, and it's not a myth, it's a method. Niccolo Machiavelli was not born into power. He observed watched it shift, falter, collapse, and be rebuilt through illusion, while the kings and generals spilled blood on the battlefield. Machiavelli stood on the edge of power, studying what the powerful feared most: irrelevance. To understand his brilliance, you have to forget the caricature. He wasn't a villain, he was a strategist, a man exiled from politics, writing in frustration and clarity, watching how power didn't depend on brute force, but on perception. His book, The Prince, is often mistaken for a manual on tyranny, but it's something far more dangerous. It's a guide to psychological warfare. A ruler, Machiavelli argued, should not seek to be loved, but feared, not vulnerable, but untouchable, not honest, but calculated in the appearance of honesty, because people are not moved by truth. They are moved by image. The vulgar crowd, he wrote, is always taken by appearances, and the world is composed of the vulgar. This was his central insight. Power is not what you possess, it's what they believe you possess. In this way, Machiavelli's writing isn't just about politics, it's about influence in its purest form. It's about crafting an aura so strong people adjust themselves in your presence. He didn't care how virtuous you were. He cared what people saw. You could be ruthless but appear fair. You could be weak but appear fearless. You could be hiding but appear everywhere. And this is where his theory of presence takes shape. True presence, in Machiavelli's eyes, is not about domination. It's about optics. When a prince or a modern person enters a space, their power should not need to be proven. It should be felt, not through aggression, but through contrast. While others explain themselves, you stay silent while others perform. You observe while others panic. You remain still. In that stillness, others reveal themselves, and you remain concealed. This is how Machiavelli thought. The more you show, the more you risk. The less they know, the more they fear, and what they fear, they respect. So how did this theory play out in the world? History is filled with rulers and leaders who mastered the art of perception. Julius Caesar delayed his own assassination by presenting himself as a benevolent father of the Republic, while privately consolidating total control. Elizabeth I of England used her status as the Virgin Queen not as a weakness, but as a mystique, controlling the image of purity while commanding absolute power. Even in modern times, public figures, from political leaders to tech billionaires, carefully curate their mystery. They speak rarely, dress simply, move unpredictably. Their silence becomes substance. This is the Machiavellian blueprint at work. Reveal nothing, control everything. Machiavelli understood that the world is shaped not by the strongest, but by those who can shape belief. Presence is not an accident. It's not charm. It's control over the frame. He advised rulers to be like both the lion and the fox, strong enough to intimidate, clever enough to deceive, visible enough to be remembered, invisible enough to never be pinned down. This duality, strength beneath softness, calculation beneath kindness, is what makes someone untouchable. Because people don't fear cruelty, they fear unpredictability. They fear the one they can't read. They fear the one who smiles with intent. And Machiavelli would say, good, let them fear, let them wonder, let them guess, because the moment they think they fully understand you, you become manageable. And once you're manageable, you're no longer powerful. So presence, in the Machiavellian sense, is not about charisma. It's about clarity. Clarity that says, I will not be fully seen, I will not be fully known, and because of that, I will always remain in control. That's how kingdoms are ruled, and that's how minds are too. Power isn't always about being seen. Sometimes it's about being missed in a world obsessed with visibility, constant updates, and 24/7's presence. There's a paradox. The more accessible you are, the less valuable you seem. The more you speak, the less you're heard. The more you chase, the more you're ignored. We've been sold the lie that relevance means never disappearing. But Machiavelli would disagree. He knew that absence is not weakness, it is tension, and tension is power. When a ruler vanishes from the public eye, speculation begins. When a public figure goes silent, anticipation builds. And when you withdraw, not in fear, but in calculation, you become something far more dangerous than visible. You become a mystery, and mystery always commands more attention. The noise. Machiavelli understood that humans are not rational creatures. They are addicted to meaning. They crave certainty. And when you remove yourself, when you become unavailable, people fill in the blanks with stories, fantasies, projections. The person who is rarely seen is never forgotten, because their absence forces the imagination to work harder. This is why ancient kings were rarely seen by commoners. Their faces became legend, their movements, myth, their silence, sacred. The untouchable don't show up to be validated. They show up with purpose, and then vanish before their presence becomes ordinary. They don't over-explain, they don't overshare, they don't flood the room with their energy. Instead, they create psychological scarcity. Scarcity breeds value. You don't value air, you have it constantly. You don't obsess over people who are always available. You obsess over what you can't have, and this is the art of strategic absence. Not running, not hiding, but choosing your moments with precision. Let others exhaust themselves with constant performance. Let them prove, explain, apologize. You withhold, and in that withholding, your power builds, because every moment you're silent, others speak. Every moment you're gone, others think. And every moment you don't give, others want. This technique isn't new. Napoleon Bonaparte famously vanished from the political scene, only to return with overwhelming force when people least expected it. Andy Warhol built an empire of fame while rarely explaining himself, speaking in riddles and disappearing for months at a time. Even in modern culture, the figures who dominate headlines aren't the loudest. They're the ones who appear just enough to remain unforgettable, and then recede to let mystery ferment. This isn't just personality, it's positioning. When you practice strategic absence, you're doing three things. First, you protect your energy. You avoid being overexposed, overexplained, and ultimately overlooked. Send. You build anticipation. People notice your withdrawal. They question it. They prepare for your return. Third, you shift the balance of power. The one who withdraws first sets the tempo. The one who is missed, not the one who begs, is the one who wins. Machiavelli would remind us, a ruler does not beg for loyalty. He makes loyalty feel like privilege, and privilege is always given to those who are rare. So how do you become rare? You stop proving yourself. You stop being everywhere. You learn to vanish, not out of fear, but out of power. You leave conversations unfinished. You delay replies without apology. You don't react, you observe, and most of all, you never let anyone believe they have full access to you, because full access kills desire, it kills leverage, and it kills the mystique. That untouchability depends on this. Is not about playing games, it's about reclaiming gravity, because when you make yourself scarce, your presence becomes an event, and events leave impressions. Events change dynamics. Events reshape the room. World doesn't need more voices, it needs more gravity, and gravity isn't loud. It's heavy, it pulls without asking. It's felt, not announced. Strategic absence doesn't say, look at me. It says, you'll notice when I'm gone. And once they do, you've already won. Power is rarely loud. Its most effective form moves in silence, exerts itself without display, and controls without ever appearing to command. Machiavelli understood this deeply. The most feared rulers weren't the ones who barked orders. They were the ones who said little, moved less, but made their presence known by what they didn't do. This is the principle of low reactivity, a quiet psychological weapon. It's the ability to remain still when others are triggered, to remain composed when others are scrambling to observe when others are oversharing. Every dynamic, whether political, romantic, or professional, the one who appears less emotionally affected holds more weight. The loud one demands attention, the quiet one controls its presence. The kind that unsettles and commands comes not from aggression, but from gravity, and gravity is born in emotional self-discipline. Think of the seasoned negotiator who doesn't blink at the offer, the leader who waits through chaos before responding, the partner who, in an argument, doesn't raise their voice, but lowers it. There's power in restraint in a world addicted to overreaction. Underreacting becomes dominance. This is the invisible hand. Control without the appearance of control. Modern society worships spectacle. The one who yells loudest, posts most frequently, reacts quickest. They dominate feeds, but not respecting. Business. The CEO who doesn't explain their every move is feared more than the one who does. In politics, the calm dictator is more effective than the erratic revolutionary. In love, the partner who holds composure in storms becomes the emotional anchor, or the threat. Stoicism, often mistaken for detachment, is actually radical clarity. It's the ability to pause to feel the emotion and not act from it. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire while practicing inner silence. He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Machiavelli would agree, but with a sharper edge. Control your emotions, because if you don't, someone else will. We're taught that presence is about charisma, charm, energy, but real presence is psychological gravity, the feeling that someone is centered, not just noticed. The unshakable become untouchable. They are not passive, they're precise. They don't dominate the room by performance, they dominate it by perception, because while everyone else is reacting, they're calculating. While others fight for relevance, they let mystery speak. You cannot manipulate someone who doesn't need your validation. You cannot intimidate someone who won't flinch. You cannot overpower someone who holds their emotional reins. This is how control is exerted invisibly, not with noise, but with the absence of it. In a world obsessed with constant stimulation, the rare person who speaks less, feels deeply, and reacts deliberately becomes magnetic. They're not trying to impress you. They're making you question why you feel the need to be impressive, and that shift from reaction to restraint is the axis of power. Becoming untouchable isn't about building walls, it's about building depth, the kind of depth that doesn't flinch when tested, that doesn't chase chaos, that doesn't trade peace for performance, because once you master silence, you control the noise. And when you control the noise, you control the room. Presence is not a performance. It's the weight of a mind that no longer needs to prove itself. This is Machiavelli's invisible hand. This is control without noise. Some of the most powerful people in history said almost nothing and revealed even less. But when they spoke, it felt like they understood you, saw you, reflected you. That wasn't empathy, it was architecture. Machiavelli knew that influence doesn't come from shouting who you are, it comes from showing others who they want to be. The art of power is the art of projection. You do not dominate people by revealing your inner self. You become their mirror, because people don't follow truth, they follow recognition. They follow reflections of their hopes, fears, and ideals. They follow people who look like the answers to their questions. To be untouchable, you must become exactly that, a mirror, polished, controlled, unreadable. This tactic appears everywhere among charismatic leaders, elite negotiators, even cult figures. They don't impose, they echo. They let the audience project fantasies onto them, and they never correct the fantasy, because that would break the illusion. This is not about deception, it's about precision. A psychological strategy used not to lie, but to withhold, to maintain control of the narrative, because if people believe they know you, they stop wondering. But if they can't quite figure you out, their curiosity becomes obsession. Mirroring isn't imitation, it's calibration. You tune your words, Your energy, your silence to match the room's emotional pitch, and when it works, people leave conversations not thinking about you, but about how they felt around you, and that is power in high-stakes diplomacy. Spies are trained to mirror their targets, not just in words, but in posture, pace, tone. It builds unconscious trust, the illusion of connection, and it allows infiltration without resistance in relationships. Mirroring creates intimacy quickly. Too quickly, when someone feels deeply seen early on, they confuse it for soul recognition, but often, they're just falling in love with their own reflection. This is why so many charismatic figures aren't loud or flashy. They're quiet, curious, empty. In a strategic way, their power doesn't come from presence. It comes from creating space for others to fill with meaning, and as long as you control the frame, you control the interpretation. This is what Machiavelli would have understood perfectly: to be untouchable. You don't show your hand, you become the table everyone plays on. You offer just enough openness to be approachable, but never enough depth to be predictable. You speak in a way that feels personal, but reveals nothing permanent. You maintain eye contact that penetrates, but doesn't expose you. Allow others to feel known while you remain unknown. The danger of authenticity in the modern age is that it's weaponized. Oversharing isn't vulnerability anymore, it's data. And data gets used, twisted, repurposed. But the mirror protects you because it reflects. But it absorbs nothing. In a world that demands transparency, the rarest form of power is opacity. And those who master the mirror command the room without ever entering fully. So ask yourself, do they know you? Or do they know what you let them see? And are you living, or are you just reflecting what they crave? Because to be untouchable in a world obsessed with exposure, you must be unforgettable without ever being fully understood. Pain is inevitable, but reaction? That's a choice, and for the untouchable, it's a weapon. Machiavelli never saw enemies as inconveniences. He saw them as raw material. Every betrayal, every rejection, every rumor, an opportunity to reframe the narrative, to show strength, not through retaliation, but through restraint. This is the art of emotional Aikido. In traditional Aikido, you don't meet force with force, you absorb it, redirect it. Let the attacker's momentum become their downfall. You remain grounded, while they collapse under their own aggression. The same principle applies in psychological warfare. The untouchable don't escalate. They don't defend themselves emotionally. They observe. They let the outburst reveal the attacker. They let slander spread, and then step in with silence so deafening it becomes a statement in itself. Because when someone attacks you, they're not just testing your power, they're testing your poise. And most people fail that test by reacting too quickly, too emotionally, too loudly. But the untouchable wait. Machiavelli once wrote, "The wise man does at once what the fool does finally." To weaponize pain, you must first refuse to be ruled by it. Let the insult land. Let the betrayal happen. Let them believe they've shaken you, and then do nothing, not out of passivity, but out of precision. Because silence, when timed correctly, is not absence. It's pressure. Think of history's most iconic figures. Nelson Mandela, who after decades of imprisonment, emerged not with vengeance, but with vision. Or Marcus Aurelius, who ruled an empire under constant pressure, but wrote only to himself in a journal, reminding his own mind to remain still. These were not weak men. They were strategic containers of emotional chaos. The moment you react emotionally, you become readable, and what is readable is controllable. But when you respond slowly, when you absorb the hit without flinching, people begin to see you as something else, entirely uncheckable, unpredictable, uncontrollable. This is how reputations are built, not in moments of ease, but in moments of fire, because fire tests the structure. What doesn't collapse under heat becomes legend. The untouchable don't avoid criticism. They make it irrelevant. They don't avoid conflict. They let it reveal the hierarchy. They don't argue their worth. They wait for silence to do it for them. You don't need to clap back at every insult. You don't need to defend every rumor. You don't need to explain your choices to those who never mattered, because the moment you do, you lower yourself too. Their frame and the untouchable never play in someone else's frame. Instead, they flip it. They absorb mockery and become myth. They absorb failure and become fables. Very things meant to break them become the bricks that build their legend. So, ask yourself, what happens when someone insults you publicly? Do you react? Do you defend? Or do you look them in the eyes, smile faintly, and disappear, only to reappear with results so undeniable they replace every insult ever spoken? That's power. That's emotional aikido. It's not suppression. It's transmutation, turning rejection into redirection, turning conflict into command, turning loss into leverage. When they hit and you don't move, you become the storm they never saw coming, not because you're loud, but because your silence is a strategy, because your emotions don't own you, you own them, and that is what makes you untouchable. What the world sees as power is only the surface, a still lake, a perfect mask. But underneath, there's something else, a war, a crucible of discipline, an unrelenting code that no one sees, but is always felt behind every untouchable presence. Lies a brutal private world, and no one understood this better than Machiavelli. He was not born to privilege, he rose to influence, only to be cast out, exiled, stripped of political power, betrayed by those he served. For most, exile meant irrelevance, but for Machiavelli, it became transformation. He retreated into the countryside, surrounded by silence, isolation, and obscurity, and there, far from the applause and chaos of courts, he created the Principe, so sharp, so merciless, that it still cuts through centuries of political deceit. This wasn't written from a place of comfort. It was forged in solitude, and solitude is where the untouchable are made. You can't cultivate presence without silence. You can't build gravity without solitude. You can't become untouchable unless you learn to sit with your own mind and not flinch. The untouchable train alone. They journal not to express emotions, but to dominate them. They don't react to the world, they prepare for it. They don't wait for peace, they build it in routineness. Is the ritual of inner ruthlessness. You wake early not for productivity, but to dominate the day before the world invades it. You maintain boundaries not to appear cold, but to remain clear. You practice detachment, not to avoid connection, but to avoid dependence, because every time you compromise your inner structure to please others, you lose weight, and presence is weight. It's gravity that cannot be faked. Machiavelli knew this. A prince who cannot rule himself will never rule others, so he practiced emotional austerity. He studied human nature, not to worship it, but to control it, and control requires clarity. That clarity is born in rituals today. We'd call them Stoic practices, journaling, like Marcus Aurelius, fasting, like Epictetus, cold, clear choices made in private, so that chaos in public cannot break you, because the untouchable aren't born. They're built in silence, in routines no one sees, in sacrifices no one celebrates. They say no to pleasure, not because they hate it, but because it makes them soft. They embrace boredom, not because they enjoy it, but because it sharpens focus. They endure solitude, not because they like being alone, but because they know the person who fears solitude will always fear rejection, and rejection is how you get controlled every day. They return to their practices not out of passion, but out of necessity. Because presence isn't something you turn on, it's something you become, and you become it through cold repetition. You choose stillness in a world addicted to movement. You choose depth in a world ruled by dopamine. You choose minimalism not to look aesthetic, but to eliminate distractions, because attention is currency, and you guard yours like a fortress. These rituals are not glamorous, they are not marketable, but they are devastatingly effective, because while others chase validation, the untouchable sharpen the blade while others scroll. They write while others react. They reflect while others entertain. they evolve. There is violence in this path, not outward, but inward, the killing of laziness, the strangling of neediness, the starvation of ego, and over time, this creates something rare: a human who does not flinch under pressure, who doesn't explain themselves, who doesn't chase or panic or perform, because their power does not come from performance. It comes from ritual, from boundaries that cannot be moved, from a self-respect that doesn't require applause. Machiavelli would say, "Don't beg the world to see your worth. Make your worth undeniable through discipline. Make your silence heavier than their noise. Make your absence more valuable than their presence, because once your inner life becomes untouchable, so will your outer one. And when you walk into a room, you won't need to speak to be respected. You won't need to explain to be believed. Your very being will say, I have trained where you haven't. I have sacrificed what you couldn't. I have mastered what you fear, and that is what makes me untouchable." Power doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's not just something you have. It's something others must feel, and that feeling of awe, of fear, of reverence, is manufactured, engineered, carefully fed into the bloodstream of society until it becomes belief, and belief becomes reality. This is the social game, where presence is performance, where perception is dominance, and where the untouchable don't just live, they become legends in real time. Machiavelli understood that power isn't confirmed by internal conviction alone. It must be reflected back by the masses. The illusion of control must be echoed, repeated, mythologized, until it no longer needs proof, because when others treat you as powerful, it makes you powerful. The world submits not to truth, but to consistency. And when you consistently project strength, composure, indifference, and control, people start to organize themselves around you. They adjust their tone, their posture, their strategies, not because you told them to, but because your presence told them how to behave. This is the psychology of dominance hierarchies in any group, whether wolves, executives, politicians, or peers. There are subtle cues that determine the order: body language, response speed, eye contact, movement. Untouchable don't talk too much, but they always get the last word. They don't interrupt, but they're never interrupted. They don't brag, but their absence is felt like a void crowd. Psychology confirms this. Confidence, real or perceived, is contagious. If one person treats you like a leader, the rest follow suit, and every time someone defers, others notice. The behavior multiplies, and you become something more than just human. You become a social signal. People start to explain your silence as wisdom, your absence as power, your mystery as depth. And so, power scales. Look at world leaders who've shaped history, not by charisma, but by commanding the social narrative. Julius Caesar, who walked into Rome uninvited and watched the Senate bend. Steve Jobs, whose brutal minimalism and visionary silence made him not just a CEO, but a symbol. Or even someone like David Bowie, who blurred lines between reality and persona until the persona became immortal. In each case, what mattered wasn't just talent or insight. It was the ritualized performance of strength, controlled exposure, precision in speech, predictable unpredictability, and an unwavering commitment to staying in character. Because here's the secret: no one knows who you are. They only know who you consistently show them. And if you show them calm under pressure, they believe you're unbreakable. If you show them discipline, detachment, and mystery, they treat you like something sacred. But if you flinch once, if you explain yourself, if you seek validation, if you overreact, the illusion fractures, because the untouchable aren't allowed to be fully human. They must become something else entirely. A projection of strength so compelling, it no longer needs defending. So the question becomes, are you playing the social game, or are you being played by it? Because power, in its highest form, isn't about dominance through fear. It's about shaping reality through presence. When the world treats you as untouchable, you no longer need to prove anything. You simply exist, and that existence bends the room. There is a silence no amount of power can fill. You walk into a room, and the world bends. They respect you, they admire you, some even fear you, but no one truly knows you because they can't, because you've built walls so high. Even your reflection feels like a stranger. This is the cost of presence, the price of becoming untouchable, and it is not cheap at first. It feels like freedom. You no longer flinch, you no longer beg, you no longer need. But over time, the solitude stops feeling like strength and starts tasting like exile. Machiavelli taught the architecture of power, but he also lived the aftermath of its pursuit. In exile, he found truth, not in strategy, but in silence, not in dominance, but in absence. And the truth is, becoming untouchable can become a prison, because the same tactics that protect you from manipulation, chaos, weakness, also protect you from intimacy, vulnerability, connection, and eventually, they protect you from yourself. Nietzsche warned of this. He who fights monsters must be careful not to become one, and if you gaze long into the abyss gazes also into you. When you spend your life managing perception, you forget what it feels like to be real, to feel without framing it, to speak without calculating tone, to love without checking for leverage, and yet there's still a human being inside you, still a child who wanted to be seen, still a heart that beats for more than dominance. But when your whole identity is built on being unbreakable, where do you go when you're breaking? Who do you call when no one's allowed to see the cracks? The danger of becoming untouchable is not just isolation, it's disconnection from emotion, from spontaneity, from the sacred chaos of being alive. Power, unchecked, calcifies the soul. It wraps you in armor so thick even warmth can't get in, and soon, the very thing you feared, being vulnerable, becomes your deepest craving. You want to let go, you want to be held, but you've trained yourself to see every touch as a threat. This isn't a weakness, it's a reality, because presence without emotion becomes performance, power without tenderness becomes tyranny, and a fortress without a door eventually traps its own king. So what's the answer? It's not collapse, it's not abandoning the structure, it's conscious exposure. Reveal, not recklessly but intentionally. Feel, not blindly but fully. Connect, not to be saved, but to stay human. You can still love, you can still grieve, you can still hold someone's hand without giving away your spine, because vulnerability, when chosen not coerced, is strength. Let them see pieces of you, let them earn the full story, let them witness the weight, not just the walls. You are not less powerful for having a heart. You are more, because power that cannot coexist with love was never real power. Even Machiavelli, in his darkest observations, knew this. Fear may keep people in line, but it will never earn their soul and presence. Real presence isn't just about tension and silence and leverage, it's about being felt. So yes, build your rituals. Yes, master the silence. Yes, guard your energy, shape your aura. Walk with gravity, but don't forget to feel. Don't forget to cry. Don't forget to say, I need you, without shame, because the truly untouchable are not the ones who never bend. They're the ones who choose when to open, and that choice, that risk, is the final mark of a ruler who has mastered not just the world, but themselves. It begins with a whisper, a presence that moves without friction, a silence that holds more power than 1,000 words, a glance not loud, not forced, but final. Untouchability isn't about being distant, it's about becoming undeniable. You don't need to be the loudest in the room, you just need to be the one who doesn't flinch, because in a world that reacts, over-explains, and seeks constant validation, the one who remains still wins. Machiavelli never promised love, he promised clarity. He offered the tools not to be liked, but to be remembered. Appear as you wish to be, but become what they never saw coming. This is the final frame, the crystallization of everything. Untouchable presence is not what you say, it's what others feel when you enter, and what lingers when you leave. Power is not aggression, it's restraint. The refusal to be predictable, the discipline to stay calm when provoked, The patience to act only when the time is perfect and never a moment before. Influence is not performance. It's the quiet command of someone who knows themselves too deeply to need permission from others. The untouchable does not beg for affection. They don't chase relevance. They don't decorate their emptiness with noise. They let the silence do the talking. They let their presence rearrange the room without saying a word, and they let their life speak for them slowly, ruthlessly, and unmistakably. This is not arrogance, it is architecture. You build yourself from the inside out, not on applause, not on attention, but on rituals, on stillness, on an unwavering code that no one sees, but everyone feels. You do not need to explain your boundaries. You do not need to announce your worth. Your absence will say what your words never could, and when you return, it will be with precision, not apology. People will ask how you do it, how you remain untouched, unreadable, unshaken. The truth is, there is no trick. You trained in the dark. You cut out the noise. You mastered the art of less, and in doing so, you became more. Because when the world demands speed, you choose stillness. When it demands exposure, you choose mystery. And when it demands surrender, you choose self-respect. You were never here to be the most liked. You were here to be the most felt. The world does not remember the loudest. It remembers the ones who change the temperature of the room just by standing in it. And you are the storm they can't name, the shadow they can't ignore, the standard they can't meet. They will tell stories about your silence. They will try to decode your decisions. They will call you cold, cruel, calculated. Let them. Because while they talk, you build. While they chase, you vanish. While they seek validation, you become legend. This is the power of clarity. You know who you are. You know what you're not. And most of all, you know the price of your own presence. So stop asking to be understood. You weren't built for that. You were built to leave a mark, to walk into chaos and remain calm, to hold the line when others fall apart, to choose solitude over noise, precision over panic, truth over applause. You were built to be untouchable, and in a world addicted to explanation, you will be remembered as the one they never could explain, because your strength was quiet, your power was subtle, and your presence was unforgettable. If you found this exploration of Stoicism inspiring, please like the video, subscribe to the channel for more philosophical insights, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your engagement helps us continue to bring you content that enriches your life. Thank you for watching.